A brutal milestone this Wednesday night. Almost 2 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Global News revisits the besieged city of Kharkiv.
It is a city of unbreakable and invincible people.
Alabama's landmark ruling that frozen embryos are children.
If this fertilized egg is now a child, can we freeze them?
The implications for fertility treatment and a new chapter in reproductive rights. The federal government's plan to support black public servants.
It's still very much a land of opportunity.
As it fights a lawsuit over how these employees have been treated. And the courtroom, not such a lovely place.
Welcome to the Hotel California.
The legal battle over handwritten lyrics of a legendary album.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The brutal war sparked by Russian President Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine is about to enter its third year. And the main front now appears to be political. Will NATO countries, especially the U.S., grow tired of supporting and supplying Ukraine? On the battlefield, Ukraine has made little progress. It just surrendered the eastern city of Avdiivka, which it's been defending for months against a fierce Russian assault. And Russia claims it has retaken the village of Krinky, seized by Ukrainian troops last year. Ukraine denies that. It has been a relentless war, and Ukraine's second-largest city has been in the crosshairs from day one. Our Europe Bureau Chief Goomansingh has our top story from Kharkiv tonight.
Broken but not destroyed. People here say Kharkiv misto Zalizabeton. It translates in English to Kharkiv is reinforced concrete. It is a city of unbreakable and invincible people, says this woman. The slogan has become a lifeline. Since February 24th, I have seen a lot of grief and tragedies. Volodymyr Tomoshko says part of his job as police chief has been to document the deaths of 3,000 civilians in Kharkiv, 89 of those children. He grew up here and knew that he would protect it no matter what. Every person has to make his choice between fear and duty. That doesn't mean Tomoshko hasn't been scared. He says only an idiot is not afraid. As he showed us around what's left of the police headquarters, he explained his first day as police chief was the day of Russia's full-scale invasion.
So this was your office?
Так, це був мій кабінет.
On Monday, March 2nd, 2022, he was here in his office when he says 2 Iskander missiles fired by Russia hit the building.
The fact that the chief of police survived is quite remarkable. He ran out of his office towards this area. There used to be a staircase here, and they were all running down the staircase when it collapsed. They were stuck under the rubble, but luckily they were rescued.
Другий день народження.
He calls that day his second birthday. He assumes he lived because he still has more to do. The airstrikes, the chaos, seeing the injured, and knowing not everyone would survive. It is something residents young and old have experienced in Kharkiv over the past 24 months. 2 years ago, the world listened as the Russian president talked of a special military operation to denazify and liberate Russian-speaking communities in southeastern Ukraine. Kharkiv is located between 2 other regions, Luhansk and Donetsk, which were partially taken over by pro-Russian separatists following Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. While so much has been lost here, there is a newfound sense of strength. Here, I like this. I think it is about the whole city. Hamlet Zinkivsky is an acclaimed street artist, and the Yamilov Center is currently filled with his work. 1 sketch for each day. It's been an ongoing multi-year project, and his work in 2023 is personal, poetic, and mostly about the war. Art is the same as life, says the curator of the gallery. It is divided into before and after. Before February 24th, 2022, this space was all about art. After, the underground space with giant pillars of concrete served as a shelter for artists. Those months were scary and strange, but also fantastic. Fantastic because of the strength of a united community, a bond between people as strong as reinforced concrete. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Canada has summoned Russia's ambassador in protest over the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Global Affairs Canada says a senior official conveyed Canada's strong condemnation of Navalny's death and called for a transparent inquiry and the immediate release of Navalny's body to his family. The UK has imposed sanctions on 6 prison bosses at the penal colony where Navalny died last week. They'll have their assets frozen and be banned from traveling to the UK. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says Russia needs to be held accountable.
He died for a cause to which he dedicated his whole life, freedom. And to return home knowing that Putin had already tried to have him killed was one of the most courageous acts of our time.
The UK is also calling for Navalny's body to be released to his family and for a full investigation. In Alabama, couples undergoing fertility treatment are trying to figure out what to make of a Supreme Court ruling. The court has granted human rights to frozen embryos, declaring they are people, raising worrisome legal issues for clinics and parents. Fertility treatment is now commonplace. In 2021, more than 86,000 babies born in the U.S. were conceived using assisted reproductive technology. Jackson Proskow breaks down this ruling and its wider implications.
The stunning decision from Alabama's Supreme Court has enormous and immediate consequences for fertility care.
I think my mind is still wrapping around all of the implications of this.
In ruling that frozen embryos have the same legal status as children, Alabama's Chief Justice quoted the Bible, writing, "Even before birth, all human beings have the image of God, and their lives cannot be destroyed without effacing his glory." Perhaps not surprising in a state where abortion has been fully banned and women have been threatened with prosecution if they travel for reproductive care.
As I've said many times, we foster the culture of life and protect the sanctity of life.
The court offered no clear roadmap for what is and isn't legal. At least one major hospital in the state has said they will no longer perform IVF, fearing prosecution. During IVF, multiple embryos are created. Unused embryos are typically frozen or discarded.
If this fertilized egg is now a child, can we freeze them? Who is potentially criminally liable? Is it the people who created those embryos? Maybe it's the embryologist, or maybe it's somebody in the fertility clinic. We simply don't know.
Fertility treatments and contraceptives are the next fight in the war on reproductive freedoms in the U.S.
Abortion rights!
Ever since the overturn of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court, conservative states have challenged the legality of other rights on the books. The results leave patients and practitioners scrambling.
Where I think they might have not done due diligence is seeking expert opinion in understanding the ins and outs of the laws that they're creating.
The ruling may be destined for the U.S. Supreme Court. Even if overturned, the state may not comply. Alabama's Constitution explicitly states unborn life is entitled to legal protection. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
There's more information tonight about a man who worked for Ontario Power Generation, accused of deliberately leaking safeguarded information that could harm Canada. Global News has obtained court documents outlining the charges James Musali faces under the Security of Information Act. The charge sheet shows that Musali was accused not only of revealing highly sensitive material, but doing so with the intention of providing information to a terrorist group or foreign government with the intent of harming Canada. A source with knowledge of the investigation tells Global News Musali allegedly posted information related to nuclear security vulnerabilities in public online posts. Ontario Power Generation says the alleged leaks did not harm security. They did not respond to additional questions from Global News today, citing the ongoing investigation. The allegations have not been proven in court. The federal government launched the first steps of what it's calling an action plan to support Black public employees in Canada. As Abigail Bimman reports, it's committed nearly $50 million for career development and mental health supports.
I hit 20 years in January.
Doalu Saul is in a small group, both a longtime federal civil servant and in a high-level position. The most recent federal data shows 4.2% of civil servants identify as Black. At the executive level, it's only 2.3%.
I think most people have the idea that, oh, it's the public service, everything's fair and equitable, and there are no issues.
I would say that in my experience that isn't necessarily the case. It's still very much a land of opportunity and who you know and who you might be connected to. So this program was an opportunity to give access and exposure to a group of public servants who have demonstrated that they're up to the task.
Saul is finishing up a pilot program through the Canada School of Public Service to support career advancement for Black executives.
We haven't done enough, and we haven't done it fast enough.
New funding now makes that program permanent. There's also more funding for coaching and mental health supports, the first steps of the government's action plan for Black public servants announced Wednesday. A 2022 survey found 11% of Black public servants experienced discrimination at work, compared to 6% of non-racialized, non-Indigenous workers.
Well, I am here today to commit, on behalf of the Government of Canada, to do better.
These announcements continue to fall short.
The action plan launches against the backdrop of a $2.5 billion class action lawsuit for Black civil servants. A certification hearing is set for May, and Nicholas Marcus Thompson says the government has spent $10 million so far fighting it.
Filing motions after motions to dismiss what Black workers have said they've experienced, but politically is telling the Canadian public that the discrimination does exist. Enough is enough.
This month, the federal court approved Amnesty International's request to deliver arguments in the case, and Wednesday the government said they won't challenge that decision. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Allegations of sexual violence in the Hamas attacks on Israel. Coming up, the lengthy and complicated process to gather evidence. The Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel says it's found evidence of systemic and deliberate rape and sexual abuse during the October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israel. In a report released today, the organization claims widespread sexual crimes took place at a series of locations across southern Israel and says sexual abuse was not an isolated incident or sporadic cases, but rather a clear operational strategy. The report does not specify how many cases were documented. Hamas has rejected the allegations, a warning the details in the story are graphic. Danielle Hamamdjian explains the work still underway to gather evidence.
As the sun rose on October 7th, more than 3,000 people kept dancing and partying, the loud music drowning out the sound of gunfire. Today, the distant sound of war in Gaza looms over a memorial to the dead here.
The sheer scale of atrocity here at the site of the Nova Music Festival was far beyond anywhere else.
Israeli and UN officials are investigating widespread reports of sexual violence during the Hamas-led attacks, the most daunting obstacle that so few live to tell what happened. Officials say they know of at least 4 alleged survivors of sexual violence. The rest were killed.
Women were found violated, bleeding, with semen on them. We have eyewitnesses who saw women getting raped, gang raped, and set on fire or shot.
Among the challenges in building the evidence, matching witness accounts with specific victims. Chaim Otmanskin is a volunteer paramedic with Zaka, an Orthodox Jewish organization that recovered the remains of those killed in the attacks. He tells us the painstaking work of identifying the dead often relied on photos of distinct features like tattoos. He says he saw a pattern of extreme brutality, including the mutilation of sexual organs with gunfire and sharp objects. One of the women he found at the music festival had her skirt pulled above her waist and was covered in blood. The rest is too graphic to describe.
To people who say they do not believe women were raped on October 7th, what do you say to them?
What can I say to them? There's people who aren't willing to believe anything.
Yael Viask-Wiersman is gathering evidence to prosecute Hamas at the International Criminal Court in The Hague on behalf of the families of the victims. She believes the sexual violence was systematic.
If you have on the same day, in several places, the same kinds of acts, it's not a coincidence that these acts were committed.
Still, some Palestinians are skeptical, distrustful of any evidence gathered by Israeli authorities. It could take years to uncover the true extent of what happened on that October day, and longer still to prosecute those behind it. Danielle Hamamdin, Global News, near Raim, Israel.
Global News will air a special report about how Canada's Jewish communities are under attack. Rising hate, anti-Semitism in Canada airs Saturday at 7 p.m. on Global. Still ahead, a behind-the-scenes look at Canada's decision to ground Boeing's 737 MAX 8 jets. Boeing has ousted the head of its 737 MAX program less than 2 months after a door panel blew off an Alaska Airlines flight. And Global News has obtained documents about Canada's decision to ground the 737 MAX 8 in 2019. After one of those planes crashed in Ethiopia, Canada and the U.S. were among the last countries to suspend the aircraft. Turia Isri looks at what was happening behind the scenes.
No one survived Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. It was the second crash involving a new Boeing MAX 8 in less than a year. 5 months earlier, a Lion Air flight went down off the coast of Indonesia. In the 72 hours that followed the tragedy in Ethiopia, Transport Canada debated what to do, as country after country grounded the American jet. Documents obtained by Global News show Canadian officials conducted their own safety review, but largely followed the United States Federal Aviation Administration. But the U.S. agency has come under heavy scrutiny for its safety reviews of Boeing jets.
And Boeing basically said, there's nothing wrong with this airplane, let it rip.
2 days after the crash, European regulators banned the MAX 8 from their skies. Canada and the U.S. stood by the jet. According to the internal documents, an official wrote, there is no indication that the Lion Air and Ethiopian airline crashes are linked.
It's very important not to jump to any conclusions.
That night, Transport Canada staff appeared uncertain about the jet's safety. They prepared 3 different speeches for 3 different scenarios: restricting the aircraft, declaring it safe, or allowing it to operate under certain conditions. By 7:20 a.m. the next morning, Transport Canada received satellite tracking data suggesting some similarities in the flight profile between the Lion Air and Ethiopian Air accidents. Hours later, Canada grounded the jets.
Not conclusive, but there are similarities.
Investigators ultimately found both crashes were linked by a fatal software flaw that caused the noses to dip. Transport Canada launched its own review of the MAX 8 certification process. And in 2021, after almost 2 years grounded, Canada cleared the jet to fly again. But just last month, there was another issue with Boeing's MAX 9.
We have 177 passengers on board.
A side door blew out of an Alaska Airlines flight midair. No one was injured.
They got to get their act together. And they're on very short leashes.
Boeing is now in the middle of a shakeup. The company has ousted the head of its troubled 737 passenger jet program. Turia Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
Not a nice surprise. Next, why handwritten lyrics of a legendary album are the focus of a criminal trial. There's a highly unusual criminal case underway that centers on the lyrics of one of the biggest selling albums of all time. The Eagles' Hotel California came out in 1976. Everyone who grew up in that era knows the lyrics. Those famous songs started as scribbles in notebooks. Notebooks that, as Mike Drolet reports, are now at the heart of a trial in Manhattan.
America was at something of a cultural crossroads when Hotel California was released in 1976. When Don Henley began jotting down notes on a lined yellow pad, he tried to capture the excess of the era.
Welcome to the Hotel California.
And those dark, spooky lyrics would turn into one of the most iconic rock songs of all time, and the basis for a lawsuit almost 50 years later.
Nobody would have ever thought that these handwritten notes would have ever amounted to anything. Who would want them? I mean, this predates the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It predates everything. Who would care? Well, it turns out that if you fast forward 40 or 50 years, a lot of people would, and they're willing to pay a lot of money for them.
The case itself is complicated. The three men on trial aren't accused of stealing the 80 pages of draft lyrics that were put up for auction in 2016. Henley, who will testify, alleges they were stolen by a biographer. The issue is how the defendants came to possess them.
In this particular case, we're going to get an idea of how something like handwritten lyrics get away from the author and end up in the hands of somebody else who might want to sell them so they can make a profit.
And take it to the limit.
And right now, music memorabilia is a hot commodity. Kurt Cobain's iconic sweater recently sold for over $300,000. Pink Floyd's David Gilmour auctioned off his guitar collection for over $21 million.
Such a lovely place, such a lovely place.
Henley's scribbled notes are believed to be worth over $1 million. Whoever is allowed to hawk this Eagles treasure, as the song goes, could be living it up at the Hotel California.
Sing your alibi.
Mike Drelike, Global News, Toronto.
That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is Rocky Point Park in Port Moody, BC. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.